Alright guys, I'm going to give you all plenty of time to jump in here, but in the meantime, while we're waiting for everybody to pop in, because I started a little bit early, we still have about 10 minutes before I said we were going to start things off, so come on in. While you guys are doing that, I'm just going to prepare a few things and pop open my chat and get ready to go. This is a concept by Corey Smith, and let me go ahead and pull up his ArtStation. I can show you guys that. Corey Smith is a concept artist. If you guys are on ArtStation at all, you've probably seen this concept of his Batgirl, or maybe even the Batman concept that he had. This one was on the front page for a while. It's pretty popular. Another artist who I can't think of off the top of my head did a ZBrush sculpt of this character, and I thought it would be fun to do his newest one, which of course is Batman. So again, Corey Smith, check out his work if you have not heard of him, and check out his ArtStation. He's got a ton of cool stuff on there. But yeah, I thought it would be cool to work on this concept, like I said. So that's what we're going to continue doing, and it looks like our movie has finished exporting at this point. I think with that, I'll give a few more minutes before I kind of fully start here. But in the meantime, I'll talk about what we're going to be doing with this character today. And again, feel free to ask any questions. Ask if you have any critique or anything like that. You want to post some images on Patreon or in the chat here. Send me some links, or even on Discord, wherever. Just shoot me a link. I can check that out of any of your work. I'd love to critique it, or at least maybe give you some pointers and tips and help get you in the right direction. So for today, again, working on this concept of Corey Smith's Batman face-off competition. I think he was doing a little bit of a not a competition, but a way to push himself and another artist, a friend of his. Was the point of that exercise. So real quick in here, for my movie settings, what I'm doing today and what I've been doing while working on this character, I have about 6 or 7 other small videos that I'm piecing together from start to completion. So just if you want to have a similar kind of recording process, and I can show you one of these videos here. I think it'll probably, be a little bit better to show you than try to explain it. So real quick, let's just grab one of these older ones. And no, we don't want to update VLC player. So the recording that I'm doing here, this is probably like a, I don't know, less than 5-minute recording. But the process that shows everything that you're sculpting without kind of showing your UI around the edges, I find this to be a little bit more interesting, as it kind of takes away the user interface, kind of takes all that away, and focuses more of what's happening on the model that you have on screen. So that goes through for a while, and it just kind of follows my cursor. Even my cursor, you can't even really see. It's just a red dot here. So I think that's pretty cool. Let me go ahead and again show you that those recording settings. So you want to come into Overlay Image, Title Image, and drag these sliders to 0. Of course, that's kind of the basics for all movies that you're recording here. I'm not a fan of having the title image or overlay. I just want the raw video footage. And then if I want to do any kind of like logo or anything, I can do that in post-processing and do all that. In modifiers, I kept everything on the default, so you're not really going to have to mess with anything in here. For this style of recording, I've found that the 50-50 for position and orientation do a pretty good job at taking care of those two differences. So essentially, H position at 50, that means 50% in this case. It's going to help center your model, and H orientation is going to help keep the orientation of the model a little bit more facing the camera. So you can hold control over these to kind of figure out what all these do. But again, these are all pretty much at their defaults, so you're not really going to have to mess with these for this setting. Doing a large document, for that, essentially you just want to make sure that your document size is larger than 1920 by 1080, so that you can kind of fit that widescreen HD format. and then all you have to do is come up here and press record. Now the problem is, if you don't have a great machine, if your computers or your laptop even is a little on the slow side, you're definitely going to see some lag in here. But while I'm starting to move this around, you're going to see this little recording up here. You're going to see the little megabyte, or it is lowercase, so I'm not sure if that's megabit. I'm going to assume it's megabyte. I'm not really positive, but when you do export it, the file size does tend to be quite a bit smaller than that number. So for all I know, it might be megabit, which I believe is like 1/8 the scale of a megabyte. But other than that, typically I let that megabyte bit number get around to anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000 before I export my video. If I make a lot of changes in here, anytime I change the camera, anytime I sculpt on my mesh, you're going to see that number go up in the top left. It's recording all of these strokes, all of this data that I am kind of doing on my canvas. So it's recording everything, not necessarily in real time, but pretty much with my modified settings. If I modified these any more, I could do a little bit more accuracy and up the frames per second recording, and lower the playback FPS if I would like to get like some real-time sculpting. Maybe do like 30-30 or 24-24 is probably enough. But the higher you make that recording frames, the more data that you're going to get on that recording, and you're not going to be able to record a single time for quite as long. So I think that's enough about the movies. I see another person has popped in here, so that's awesome. We're going to be working on our Batman today, so we still, I think, got a couple minutes before we hit when I said we would be actually starting, so I apologize for starting a little bit early. I didn't think that would be too much of an issue. We'll still go for the same amount of time as we normally do, though. So this concept, let me pull up that image again, by Corey Smith, Batman. Awesome concept. What I am attempting to do is now go into a painting phase, and probably after painting some of this, I'm going to go back and forth on paint and sculptural detail and try to make those changes and go between those. So for painting, what I want to do is begin by just projecting all of this paint information onto the front of my model. And I've kind of already done that, but I want to show you guys the process for that as well. So I'm going to take my image and throw it off here to the side. I don't need that on screen anymore. What I have done, though, is I have already imported an image of my Batman Corey Smith rendering here. Can bump up the opacity. Spotlight here is the tool that I'm using. It doesn't like the color black, so you can see here that it kind of erases most of that. You can get that back with some painting, I believe, but for now it's not messing with the face, so I'm totally fine with what it's done here, so it's not really bothering me too much. So for this, what I've done is I've gone up into texture, gone into my texture window here, and clicked on import, imported this image of my reference, clicked on that image, and then just clicked add to spotlight, and that's going to pop up my spotlight window here. Kind of aligned it up in the center of the image and came over here to opacity, pulled that down a little bit, so I'm just rotating that counterclockwise, and also we'll keep that on for now. I'll show you guys here in a sec. So Shift-Z, I can turn that off. I lined up my Batman image here with this, turning off perspective, and then going into my movie palette again, so where we were before under timeline show. So you want to click show so you can get your timeline up here. I lined that up and clicked on the timeline to get a dot. So now wherever I move this, whatever orientation it's at, I can always click this red line here and snap back to the exact same orientation, and then reference between my sculpt as well as the painted information that we have in our reference. So what I've done here, and I'll go ahead and actually we'll keep the opacity a little bit lower just so you can kind of see this. I'm going to turn on all my paint here for our sculpt. So just click all that, and you can see I've done a very quick projection for each of my subtools here. So if we turn to the side, we can see that the projection has not gone back through the side of the head or even the back of this, and of course we've missed a bunch of the cape here, but for the most part we've done a fairly decent job of projecting onto this. And I'm actually going to pause our video and delete this since we're not actually doing anything right now. I saw that was still going up. We're getting a little bit lag. So you can see here that it's actually quite a bit faster when we're not recording. So again, you want to have a fairly powerful computer if you want to be able to work and not really have a lot of those hiccups in there. So I've done a quick projection just so I can get a base coat and kind of understand what's going on here a little bit better. So I think we're going to go from this point and then move forward and see what else we can do. So we're going to begin. Let me go ahead and show you, like I said, real quick, that process for projecting that paint, and then we can continue painting our model, and I'll show you guys some techniques for all of that. I don't think I've done a ton of videos for showing off that painting. So let's go ahead and do that. So I am going to use my mask piece here. This mask, if I turn off the poly paint on it, you'll see that it's just a hollow piece. Let me turn everything back on. So this is one subtool here. I have the mouth underneath. You can see that we got some color bleeding, so we'll have to fix a lot of this as we go back through. And then if I turn that color back on, you can kind of see what we got going on here. So let's go ahead and project some paint. So not only is our spotlight tool a reference image for us, but it's also a great tool for painting. So I'm going to fill this with a solid white color, so you can see here. And then I am going to take my standard brush, so you can go into your brush palette and find your standard brush. I have it on my quick bar menu down here. And I'm, instead of Z add, that should be on for you guys, but you want to turn that off and turn on mRGB. I'm going to use a skin shade 4 material, and I am going to just turn on solo mode so it's a little bit easier for me to paint here. And what I'm going to do is just take my brush, make sure my RGB intensity is all the way up at 100, and just begin stroking right here. I'm not even using my pen. I'm actually just using my mouse just to make sure that I get 100% of that color filled in there. So we can, as you can see, you can just go through here, fill that in. If you need to turn it off for a second, you can do that just so you can see a little bit better. And just like that, just to help project all those colors. And if you have a little bit of material here in the back that you want to change, I can turn on that M only material channel and click fill object, and that's going to blend those materials all into a single material. So that's not all too difficult, I don't think. I think that gives us a nice starting point here to work with. And from there, we can begin working on the rest of our paint. Right before I joined you guys, I was working on just kind of going through and cleaning up a lot of this white that we have, cleaning up a lot of these areas on the side and back of the head, and I'm going to continue doing that, and I think that'll be a good place to go next. So real quick here, let me just check this chat. It looks like the stream health is good and going great. Let's see here. Let me make sure that this is coming through on Patreon. And it looks like it is. So it looks like the stream health is good. It looks like my audio levels are coming through. I actually want to pull this mic a little bit closer to me, so sorry for the mic pops you're going to get here as I bounce up against this. But I think we are all set. Let me know if you guys can hear me, and give me the thumbs up. And I think we will continue on forward. And for those that will be popping in later and are just kind of coming in now, and if you feel like you missed anything, don't worry about it. I always throw up, I always puke it up on my YouTube channel, just so for those that did miss anything, don't have to worry about it, and you can catch all that stuff later on at your own convenience. All right. So let's go ahead and start playing around with filling in a lot of these gaps. So I'm going to switch back to my standard brush MRGB channel. Or actually, let's just keep it on RGB only. That's going to make this a little bit more simple, so it doesn't really matter what material I have selected. And using the C key, wherever I hover my mouse, watch this color over here, you're going to see that as I hold that, it'll sample any color that I hover over. So I'm going to be using that so that I can kind of come through here and start gently stroking, sampling colors again with that C key, and start filling in a lot of this kind of fractal garbage that we got going on, caused by our reference image. And you're never going to get a perfect projection when you do something like this, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. But again, I am just trying to get a good base coat in here so that I can kind of get everything filled with some color, clean up all the holes, and go from there. And before we kind of get too far here, let's go ahead and start our recording back up. And as we go, we can start filling these in. And then in a little bit, you'll see that number kind of tick up there. And once it gets a little bit higher, a lot bit higher, I'll go ahead and export that video. And during that time, I can check out some critiques for you guys, or answer any additional questions that you guys might have. So with this, again, just trying to fill in a lot of this this white that we have going on, and just sampling a lot of the colors around. Some of these highlights that are kind of painterly are nice, so I want to try to pull those along the higher portions of our mesh, as well as kind of get the darker areas for the recesses. There's some cool stuff that you can do in ZBrush for masking out cavities, and we can take a look at that a little bit later as well. I think there's some really cool applications for that in almost any sculpt. It helps add a good amount of depth, and we'll take a look at some of that a little bit later. I do plan on, if we look back at our reference image here, turn that opacity up, I do plan on kind of cutting my Batman sculpt into a V here. So some of this cape down here that is all white, we're not going to have to worry about that too much. I'm not even going to paint that in completely. I'll probably just fill it with a color just so it looks a little bit more natural and less annoying as we move forward. And we can start playing with all of this. So as we play with some of these colors, this is more from the edge up there, but I do want to just kind of carry that color through, sample it, start playing with this. If you're more interested in, again, this is just a base coat, but if you're more interested in some like stippling techniques, a lot of people enjoy using the color spray stroke with an alpha 07 alpha. And with that technique, you'll get a lot more variety of colors, and you might see like a lot of greens and purples and reds and all sorts of colors kind of happening in here. And it might seem a little dirty and distracting right now, but as you start to really blend in more and more colors, this is honestly one of the better techniques for starting to paint something to get to become a little bit more realistic. So as I kind of go through here, like if you were painting skin, for instance, this is the type of painting techniques that I would be using. So for this though, for our sculpt here, we're going for more of a hand-painted look, a little bit more of an illustrative quality. So I think we're going to want more of just these freehand strokes, kind of catching these highlights, and I don't more of like a blizzard hand-painted quality to these strokes that we have going on here. So I can kind of pull those up through there. But that's not to say that the stippling kind of painting technique couldn't be useful here. And it might come into use when I go into the face, but we'll just see when we get there, see what we can kind of accomplish along the way. So I'm just going to continue filling in all this junk, and we will get there eventually. Alright. And awesome. Well, we got one more person popping in. So if you're just popping in here, welcome to the chat. Let me know if you can hear me as well. Let me know if the audio quality is all set, good to go. But we are working on a Batman character sculpt here for those just coming in here. Concept by Corey Smith. I can pull up his art station one more time real quick here. Corey Smith, go ahead and check out his art. He's an awesome concept artist, very talented, and we are working on his illustration of Batman. And currently we're going through the process of starting to fill this in with paint. We've done a little bit of projection on here, and now we're kind of going through and beginning to fill in a lot of these gaps that we have and clean up all the garbage that we got from our super nasty projection. So we'll have some time here to do some painting, as well as some sculpting, as well as answer questions. And if anybody here, again, some of the new people popping in, if you have anything you'd like critiqued or me to look at, maybe if I can give any kind of advice to you that you're looking for, I could help out in that direction as well. We're doing a bit of a recording here as while I stream. So with this sculptural live recording in my movie palette here that's happening, I'll have to export that in a little bit here. And while that's exporting, if you have any work you want me to take a look at or anything like that, I would be more than happy to do that during that time. It'll probably take a few minutes for that to fully export. So we'll have some extra time to twiddle our thumbs during that, and I can talk a little bit about some other techniques while that's happening if nobody has anything. So no worries if you don't have anything currently that you're working on. Don't scramble to try to get anything super quick. But yeah, so filling in some colors, playing around with this. Our cape's starting to look a little bit better. As I said, we're going to be cutting off a good old chunk of this guy here for the cape, so it won't matter too much about as we get to the bottom of this. But I do want to be able to fill in a good portion of this white. So as we do that, some of these harder to reach areas can be a little bit annoying. I'm just kind of rotating my camera and coming in here. And if you're having trouble with something like that, we can always use our selection tools. I prefer to use the select lasso and kind of turn that around so that we can get in here a little bit easier and start to fill these colors in as well. So we're going for that hand-painted look to this. So I am using just my standard brush with RGB turned on. I'm using a Skin Shade 4 material, which you can find that in your material palette. And while I'm doing this, I'm just kind of trying to focus on blending the colors that I already have. And the way I'm doing that is I'm using the C key, the hotkey on my keyboard. It's a default ZBrush hotkey. It'll let you sample any color that you hover your cursor over. Can be very helpful for these kinds of things. So as I start to kind of blend these colors around, I can sample a new color with the C key and pull that color through. So if I have a highlight that I like and I want to bring that all the way through, I can do that. And if I'm having some trouble with my stroke, I can always turn on lazy mouse, which I believe is just pressing L on your keyboard. You can turn that on real quick if you want to play with that. And begin using that to your advantage to get some nice clean strokes through here. And I think I want to try to pull up that highlight up through there, and then pull that darker color up through that crack, so that fold. We can keep blending all this together. Grab some black, some almost black. Looks like it's a little bit saturated with some red of some kind. Alright. And we'll just kind of fill in the colors back here, blending down from up top. And when I'm trying to blend these colors, again, I'm doing that sampling every once in a while. And I'm doing some fairly light strokes here as I blend those colors. So I can press real hard. That's going to give me 100% fill. And if I were to use my mouse, I would be kind of getting this kind of stroke. But just by pressing a little bit more lightly with my pen here, that's where that pressure sensitivity comes in handy quite a bit. I can really blend these colors to my own discretion. So just kind of pulling those through, playing with that, and filling in that cape. We can start to see how some of this is beginning to come together. We can take a look up at the face. And this is not a quick process. You don't want to try to rush painting, poly painting, especially in ZBrush. It can be a little bit hard to control, and if you're trying to rush something like this, you're just going to make it a little bit harder on yourself, or a lot of it harder on yourself later down the road. So let me mess with my quick save settings there. I just wanted to increase that, just so we're not getting a quick save every 10 minutes. We'll try to spread those out a little bit longer. Go back through here, and like I said, we're going to be cutting off most of the cape down here. So a lot of this really doesn't matter. You can get a big old brush. So most of that is going to be sliced off. And for anything that isn't, we can come back through and add some additional paint. But we're pretty much going to be pulling one of these and one of those to slice that just like that. So anything else that is outside of that kind of sphere of influence, we won't worry too much about. But we'll be able to play with some colors more as we get down that road. So again, using this image as a projection to project colors onto my mesh. You can see here that from the side angle, obviously we're projecting from the front, so we get some shearing of color from this highlight on the side of the face, as well as obviously no color on the back because, well, you can't it's a flat image, right? You can't project the side that doesn't exist. So we can play a little bit with some colors in the back and start carrying that all the way through. I can just hold shift and click this paintbrush and toggle all the paint on and off for my mesh, so we can kind of look at this and get a little bit of a better idea of what's going on. I can even turn on perspective. I've had that off for a little bit. So we can play with that and get that ready to go as we go ahead and start doing some more painting. So just so you can kind of see the sculptural detail here if you're just coming in and want to check out this guy. So I basically just have the mask as a separate piece. I have the mouth here as a separate piece, as well as this nose, which is going to be merged into the mask, or at least the nose covering. The nose portion here is actually separated, but I'm going to merge that into the mouth piece. So those will all be connected as they should be. And then I can also merge the neck into the mask and blend that as well. So he's got some pretty large sternocleidomastoid muscles bulging out of the side of his neck. And these kind of bulge and wrap around here and connect right into the clavicle down here. So his proportions are obviously very exaggerated. I mean, obviously, looking at this, he's pretty much a big old rectangle with some tiny little pointy ears. But I think that gives us a lot of room to kind of play around. But as you can see up here, I don't know if you guys saw that for a second. Let me go ahead and make a change. You can see that number becoming red. that's kind of giving you a little bit of a warning saying, hey, your movie's getting a little bit large, your movie file's getting a little bit large. You might want to just keep an eye on it and export it pretty soon. But for me, that's not actually true. So 3,000 megabits, I believe, is what that is. We were talking about that earlier. It's megabits or bytes. I believe it's megabits though, because the file size is often quite a bit more small than what that would be in megabytes. That'd be a fairly large file if that was megabytes. So I want to kind of, again, carry these colors and all of this back into this shearing so that I can kind of get rid of this and blend it a little bit better. Can kind of play with this. And again, just kind of trying to be careful here as I blend these colors. I did get some good information here from the projection, but I don't want to keep a lot of this. Like, some of this is a little off center just based on my projection, and that's totally fine. We can fix and clean up a lot of this, and obviously we're gonna have to. But as I said here, we can kind of play back and forth between doing some painting and some sculptural changes as need be. And if you guys weren't here before when I was talking about the movie settings, as that number rises steadily higher and higher, I typically export it right around anywhere from 4,000 to 7,000. So even though it's kind of red and giving me a warning right now, it should be totally fine as we move forward and play with this. And we can do this to the other side as well. So we have a pretty rough kind of blend of colors going on here over on the side of the head, and that's totally okay. We'll be able to clean that up more as we move forward, but we do want to take care of these major areas first, and then kind of do a second pass on everything. My personal sculpting practice, which carries over into painting as well, obviously, is to not spend a ton of time on any one area. Instead, kind of jump around and try to hit as much as you can. So I prefer to, like if I'm sculpting a character's face, I'll spend maybe 10-15 minutes working on the eyes, then immediately jump off the eyes and go to the nose, then the mouth and ears and proportions around the face, and just kind of jump around a lot as much as I can. And that's going to kind of help me keep everything at the same level of finish, so that while I'm working, I don't spend an hour, painting the side of Batman's head here, and the neck over here is still looking like absolute garbage. So again, I want to keep that around the same level of finish so that I can kind of keep everything cohesive. As you can see here from the projection, we got some of the skin painted directly onto our mask, so we want to adjust this, fill that in, and I projected with solo mode on, so obviously the face got projected down into here as well, and it looks a little bit funny. It looks a lot of it funny, but we can fix a lot of this that we got going on. So just kind of going through. And this is the basic process after you would perform a projection. So not too hard, but I think some people can kind of go overboard really quickly with this kind of thing. So just like I said, use light strokes to start blending those colors, and I would keep your fingers away from the undo button. I think you're going to do a lot better if you make a mistake, that you can just kind of pick and sample some more colors and start blending a lot of those back in. So instead of, ooh, that stroke wasn't quite right, instead of that, you have more of, well, let me sample this color up here and try to bring that back into the mixture. So we're going for that hand-painted quality. So as I'm doing this, parts that I want to be in shadow are going to be like the cheekbone here. I want it to kind of cast a shadow back here. Let me turn off my color. Ooh, all black. So the cheekbone here that kind of goes back, I want that to be casting a little bit of a shadow. So that's kind of stuff that I need to think about as I'm doing some painting here. So we can maybe bring some of that into our paint as we do that. And I can even look back at this image and use that as a reference. I have that image popped up on my second monitor over here, but for the most part I'm looking at the form of my mesh, and these polygroups are all out of wonk right now, and that's totally fine. But I'm looking at the forms of my model and trying to figure out how light would interact on these and play with these shapes. So again, for that hand-painted quality, we want to paint a little bit of those highlights, paint a little bit of those shadows, but I also want it is a 3D model, so it's going to have, you know, shadows cast on it and everything else inherently, because it is a 3D object, depending on where I have my lighting set up and all that. So if we look up here, we have kind of these strokes up here. I'm not looking to get some strokes per se, so I can kind of fill some of this in, make it a little bit more of a gradated highlight, and I think that's a little bit more of what we're going to be looking for. And maybe even I completely get rid of that. I'm not sure if I'll do that quite yet, but we can kind of play around with that as we move forward and clean up a lot of these areas as we go. So I can kind of blend some of these in and take highlights and exaggerate them, just getting a good base on here and blending that up through. Again, lazy mouse down here, I can use that to really just get a clean stroke if I need to. I can do the same thing over here and blend that in and use a little bit darker on the upper part so that we can get that cast shadow. So you're seeing how this can kind of all come together pretty quickly, I think. But again, it is something that it takes time. Don't rush it. Think about what you're doing before you make the stroke. Don't just kind of jump in haphazardly and start going ham, as I like to say. But just kind of think about the form of your mesh. Think about where these highlights would be. So for example, we have this highlight kind of, at least from our reference image, the light source is coming from the top, shining directly down onto the forehead, and it looks like there's a pretty strong backlight happening. But for the backlight, I probably won't hand paint that. I'll probably more so do that when I render this, just because it's going to be a little bit easier, because I'm not positive exactly what angle. I'll probably do like a straight-on view so we can get as close to this as possible. But in terms of backlighting and all that, that's going to be a lot, I think, nicer if I keep that as a rendering option instead of hand painting that. So trying to blend all these colors from the front of the head back, just because of that shearing effect that we got happening there. Makes it a little bit tough, but just try to pull those colors all the way through. And here in a minute, I'll export our first footage of this, and I can begin taking a look at some questions and any work you guys have if you want to have me take a look at that. So let's take a look here at the back of the head, and then we'll kind of pull that into the back of the neck back here, and then I think we'll be good to export this. So I'm just using a large brush right now, just kind of trying to darken this area. Bring that all the way through. And I can get some highlights on parts of this. They need a good base. So darken a lot of that. I think using projection like this is a pretty good technique for getting a base coat if you're working right off of a concept. Typically by the end of doing something like this, I've painted over the entire thing again. So I think it's a great way to kind of save some time in color sampling and working that way. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of this paint that I projected is really dirty or very low res, depending on the quality of your image. So you can, I mean, you can use that if you want, but I wouldn't recommend kind of using that as your final coat of paint, so to say. But we can pull a lot of these blacks and everything else into these cast shadow areas. I think that'll work pretty well for us. So some of this is having some shearing. Can be a little hard to see, so if I need to, I can always come up into my light source, move that around, and try to get it at a different angle to kind of help me see what's going on in certain areas a little bit better. So just rotate your camera. If you need to create some selections with your lasso tool or whatever selection tool that you're using, whatever your preference is, and try to hide everything that's kind of in the way. I think that eye over there is pretty good. I kind of like that purple, but I can kind of bring that up into a little bit of this as well. All right. So we got a lot going on here, a lot to paint, a lot to work with. I think we're getting there. I think we've already made some pretty good progress on filling in a lot of these areas. I think in terms of projection painting, this is one of the better experiences that I've had, just because I worked to kind of sculpt this to this likeness fairly well. There are some places where we have some misalignments, but we can kind of correct those as we see fit. Like I said, we would probably do some sculptural changes as well. So we can do all that here in just a little bit. So I want to have a little bit of a highlight on, that's a little bit of a strong highlight, a little bit of a highlight coming down, again, off that sternomastanoid boy. We can play with that. So just getting a base coat in here real quick. Pull that down. Most of this up here is going to go away just because the projection sheared most of those colors, and that's not what we want. This color's a little bit dark. So we got a lot of dark purple and green going on here, which I like. And for these highlights, let's see if we can try to sample something not too bright. Actually, if I want, I can kind of sample from this cape down here, color that I was using previously. And that is the neck. Obviously the face is projected onto the neck as well, so it looks a little funny. But we're all good here. So I'm going to do a little bit of a big stroke just so I can get a lot of that white out of the way. And start bringing this black, this very dark, kind of purplish blue down into here. And start to blend in that highlight as well. And for this, I think I'll just kind of do a light kind of blending, trying to get that in there. So we can try to do something a little bit like that as a base for the other side as well. And then I think we can add a little bit more depth to it with some additional painting techniques as we go. I think that'll work out pretty well. So again, I'm just kind of sampling these colors, pulling them down and through. So for this white, can try to pull that, but it's a little bit strong, so we'll probably end up blending most of that away. And now, man, it's all starting to come together. I think when you really start to add paint to your model, for me at least, that's when it starts to like really get fun, just because it starts to really kind of come alive. That's kind of part of the reason why I say all the time when I'm sculpting, try to get all those parts and pieces in there as quick as you can. For those beginning stages, I think a lot of that is just getting that base coat in there of primary forms, but it kind of applies here as well, where you're just kind of trying to get that base coat of color in here as quick as you can, which is why I wanted to focus on getting that base paint, getting all that white filled in, and get things starting to look a little bit nicer. It helps encourage you, keep you going as well. It's helpful in many ways. Alright, clean up that nose piece a little bit. Some of that paint also projected on to our nose, so it looks like it's a little bit of, whoa, that's not good. Let's bring this highlight over here. Let's kind of try to replicate this. For the nostrils, we can darken those as well. It's a little bit of a dark color, but it is a bit of a cast shadow, so I'm fine with that. Lightly try to get rid of all that green. And for the nostrils, we can maybe get a little bit of that dark green in there, and then blend it back as we see fit. Try to pull that highlight around the ring of the nose if we would like, just to kind of play with that, and darken it back down if you need to. And I'm just going to kind of pull this color back into the back of the nose here, just so that when I do kind of merge those back down together, I don't want that to kind of cause any issues and have to, essentially just in case, so we don't have to repaint anything that ends up connecting here. And again, we'll do the same thing up through here for the mouth, our mouthpiece, just so we can get rid of all that green. And I'm going to use this darker red here. Just try to use that to lightly blend into that, and hope that we can get a little bit of a shadow appearing here. So at least we have a little bit of a cast shadow going from that mask, just to see what that's going to look like. So obviously we pulled it down a little too far here, so we can blend it back up, get that a bit closer. I think same with there. Can pull in these shadows into the creases of the nasolabial fold here on the face. That's right, I know names of things. I know a little bit of anatomy. My everybody's favorite is the sternocleidomastoid, the big old fat neck muscle we were painting on earlier. It's just so much fun to say. And we got that same old problem down here. Got the mask kind of bleeding onto our face, so we can play around with adjusting that. While I'm doing that, I'm just trying to adjust a lot of the colors we have here. Obviously you can see this highlight that we have on the chin. I actually kind of like that. I kind of like the highlight that we have up on the face as well. Like I said, I wasn't sure if I wanted to really play around with this and try to keep that painterly or strictly from the light, but I think with the hand painted style that we're going for, I think that's going to work pretty well. So we can mess with that a little bit more as we move forward. But I think at this point we're close to 7,000 in our megabit slider up there. So let me go ahead and export this recording, and we can talk about what we'll do moving forward. So to do that, I'm just going to click pause, and I'm going to click export. It's going to ask me what I want to save it, and I'm just going to type in, we'll make this Batman movie number 9 over here. So we're on our 9th one. You'll see it start to go through over here, this process of exporting the video, and then it's going to pause and freeze and freak out. If you're exporting your own videos, don't worry about it. This is totally normal, just a ZBrush movie export thing. It happens, I would say, over 90% of the time. It is still exporting though, so don't freak out if you kind of see this happening. Just know that this is totally normal. This is what ZBrush does. I think it's just trying to process a lot of footage very quickly, so it can't really show all that. I think we're good now to move forward. So again, I won't mess with doing the recording anymore, at least for now, as we kind of make some subtle changes to some painting and everything else. So I deleted that recording from my movie history. So after it exports, I recommend that you do the same, or else you'll continue to extend your recording past that initial recording that you already had. So then when you export, you'll end up exporting the initial video plus whatever you continued recording after. So just keep that in mind, that after you export a video, typically you want to delete that, or you can even save the file as a ZBrush movie file for you to work with later and import if you need to, but rarely ever have I had a situation where I needed to do that. So we can continue working on our Batman now, I think, for sure. Before we tried to export our movie, we were playing around with cleaning up a lot of the paint that we can see here. And we've already made a fair amount of process, but I want to get rid of all of these just very big chunks of white that we're not going to want. And if you're working on something like this and you don't want that paint to kind of bleed up over the edge, like some of this is doing, what you can do is turn on backface masking like I have here, and that'll help with projecting all of that only on your forward-facing polygons, which can be very, very nice. I use that all the time. All right, so we are looking a lot better, a lot more clean here, for sure. But it can be a little bit tough to see. So let's go on up into light, and I want to show you guys something that I don't think I've ever. I don't talk about the lighting system in ZBrush too often, but you can add additional lights in here simply by clicking these on the light switch, excuse me, and moving these as you see fit. So I have 2 lights on, and if I look back at this first one, it's a 0.85 intensity. This is 0.3. You can mess with some of these sliders if you want to increase them, make them stronger. As you can see here, it begins to kind of become a little bit more bright than what we're looking for. You can kind of see that sphere here as I change those sliders and see how those interact with one another. So I can maybe get a little bit of a side lighting with one, which you can see could be interesting, or with the other. If I want to create a little bit of a more dramatic scene, if any of you are familiar with chiaroscuro lighting, if I'm saying that correctly, you can kind of play around with a lot of this and do some similar stuff. If I just click, I'll send this light to the back of my model so that I can get a nice ridge light or rim light around the edges. So let's turn off all these lights here, and you can kind of see how this one will create that rim effect, which is what I was talking about before. As you can see, this very strong rim light that Batman has around him. We're going to want to try to capture that as best as we can using our own lighting setup. So it's a very strong rim light, and we can attempt to kind of get the same effect here by increasing that and maybe pointing this a little bit more towards the top. Trying to mess with that. And 2 might be a little bit too strong for what we're trying to do here. But as you can see here, you can really start to mess with your lighting and get some really cool effects. But while I am painting, I want to keep this as neutral as possible, so I'm just kind of keeping this in the middle. And as you can see here, like going back and forth, obviously now it looks quite a bit darker, but for the time being, I think that'll do just fine for our purposes. So let's continue on our way and get back to some cleanup on the paint aisle. So let me check back here real quick. Make sure everything is good. Awesome. And for anybody, it looks like we got a couple people popping in that are a little bit late to the party. No worries. Working on our Batman sculpt here. Concept by Corey Smith, who I've mentioned already a couple times. Check him out on ArtStation. And check out that awesome concept artist's work. So I'm just doing kind of a little bit of a base coat on these eyelids. As you can see here, the projection was a little bit sloppy through there, so I can mess with darkening these, which is more so what I want to do than that previous light green that I had, as well as get that in there. So I think just having a full dark color isn't going to be exactly what we want, but more so blending those two together. So having that light green that I previously had and trying to blend those highlights up through there, as well as get that dark color. And we can play with those more. We can take a look at the eyes here. These are just huge spheres inside. I can turn off the paint on that so you can see them. They're just huge spheres that I have placed in here because based on the concept, they're a little bit more flat, just from that painterly quality. So we can, oh, we got some mirrored painting. We don't want that. So what I would like to do is turn off my X symmetry, and I just want to see what I can get from painting directly through here real quick. So I'm going to turn down my opacity, and there we go. Just a real quick, just to kind of see what colors we're getting in here on both sides. So I think from here I'm just going to sample this inner color. I'm also going to sample this darker gray. Whoops. Darker gray, swap my colors back, and try to just fill in. We can actually do a fill object. I think that's totally fine. And then for this darker color, and it'll help once we paint those eyelids a little bit better, we can start to paint the eyelids. If you're having, or I'm sorry, the shadow from the eyelids. If you're having some trouble doing that, again, you can use lazy mouse, or what I prefer to do a lot of the time is use my selection lasso, get a mask in there, soften that mask a lot, and then just do a fill object on there a couple times, and you can see that nice shadow we get in there. If it's a little too strong, I can step it back, but I think that looks pretty sweet, and we can try to do the same thing on the bottom. It was a bit sloppy on the mask side, so let's try to clean that up a little bit. So I'll start with a mask lasso and then come through with my mask pen and clean that up just a tad. Awesome, and then I can kind of soften that as well. And once I do, hit that fill object a couple times, and we have a nice kind of similar shadow to what we had coming from there. What I would actually like to do is draw it back on that bottom portion of the eye. I think it's a little bit too strong, and maybe even get a little bit lower of a number here on my RGB intensity, and grab a pure white. Let's go even lower, 9%, and I want to try to just widen those eyes. and just kind of get in there and be able to hand paint it. We are looking for that hand painted quality after all. And again, that low percentage of RGB value that I put in there is going to help me a lot with what I'm doing there. And we'll do the same thing on this other eye, and then we'll move on to the eyelids. Just nice clean selection there. Soften that mask, soften it on the other side, and I want to make sure that I'm not undoing what I did over here. So what I'm going to do is actually perform an auto groups, and that's going to allow me to hide that other mesh so that I can perform a fill object over here with this color. Oops, we got our RGB intensity so low. That's not what we want. We want to bring that all the way back up. So fill object, and check that out. So that looks pretty good. And maybe a little bit darker. And then I'll get the white in there and play with that. I'll do the same thing again on this bottom lid. Same process. Soften that mask, fill object, and again going back to that pure white, just so I can kind of get in here, hand paint, and make some changes. Drop that RGB intensity down. There we go. Alright, so now we can move on to working on these eyelids and see what we can do there. So select my top eyelids. That's my nose. There's my top eyelids. And I want to try to start blending a lot of these colors in here. Really not much of this geometry is even showing. And the shadow from what's happening up here, casting down, is going to make them even less visible. So I am totally fine with just really doing a base coat color here, and then also getting a lot of that dark almost black in there. All right. So with that, some things are starting to come together pretty quickly, as you can see. We can continue messing with some of the shapes here that these colors are creating. Play with cleaning a good portion of this up. This image is I don't want to say messy, but it's more messy than what I would like to get. So you can again see those strokes. I don't necessarily want to see the strokes that that my brush makes by the end of this, but I do want to have those painted shadows and painted highlights. So I think we can still get all that. I think we can kind of find that nice middle ground. And if I'm having trouble at any point seeing some of this detail to where edges turn or anything like that, I can always turn my paint off, just because again it is a little bit dark, so it does become a little bit hard to see sometimes. So turning that off will help in those situations. And I'm probably going a little bit too light here in the eyes for what I want. So we'll probably come back through and darken those up. And I can keep carrying this paint up through here. I want to take a little bit of this highlight. It's a little strong, so I'll lower my RGB intensity so that I can kind of pull that through there, catch that highlight. Same on this ridge, catching these highlights. I'm going to catch these edges. And you notice here that I'm not working with symmetry on. I broke symmetry quite a while ago while sculpting, doing the actual sculptural detail of this character. So I don't have a great symmetry axis anymore. I could still probably mirror some strokes for painting, like up here on the temples, just because, you know, bone doesn't tend to move on your face for an expression or anything like that. So those are going to be pretty much all in the same place. But some parts of the fleshier parts, like the mouth and the expression in the eyes, are obviously asymmetrical. So I'll be working in just asymmetry for pretty much this whole time moving forward. I think that's also going to give a lot more painterly quality to this, having that lack of symmetry in my strokes. Plus, if I'm looking for a specific lighting, this is more straight on, but if I was looking for more of a specific lighting angle, which probably wouldn't be a great idea for something like this, but if I was, then I could definitely use that asymmetry to my advantage in that regard. So darkening those eyes, continuing to play with that. I want to do the same here for these eyelids. And I can maybe try to pull some of that back out later for some highlights. Trying to, as long as we have the correct mesh here selected, trying to blend some of this shadow out. Blend all these colors a little bit better. All this, I mean, from the start, it's been pretty much the same kind of idea and technique, you know, sample and blend, but there is a little bit of some practice that has to kind of go into this. It's not something that you're just gonna, in my opinion, be able to just pick up and do it as best as you can right away. It's not like box modeling where you can kind of follow along with the tutorial and, hey, pull this edge this amount of units and this point and blah blah blah. I think you get the idea. Whereas this is more of just kind of practicing your eye for what you're looking for and being able to replicate that with your hand and being able to actually replicate what you're looking for here in ZBrush. So don't be super discouraged if you're attempting to do something similar to what I'm doing here and it's not turning out exactly like the concept that you want to try to replicate, or if it's not turning out exactly the way you want it to. So just give it some time, really spend some time on it. If you're struggling, I would recommend that you take a break from that project and try to work on something else and then come back maybe like a week or two later and then or even a day later. Just try to kind of see it with some fresh eyes, come on back and give it a try again. Kind of play with some of this. Being careful with those colors, blending them as best as I can, trying not to lose some of the cool highlights that we have in there, but also trying to blend some strokes, just because, again, I don't want to see those too much. I want to get some cool shapes in here without being able to see brush strokes like I can see there. So I am going to continue working on this mask up here at the top for the brow region. Then I can look at this mouth, because as you can see, the projection and where the crease of my mouth happened are not aligned properly. So the crease of where my two lips comes together is there, but the paint for it projected up a little bit. So I need to actually shift the geometry so that my mouth is aligned a little bit better, and then maybe I can re-project that, and we can try to get that a bit closer, I think. I think that would be a good idea. Again, I do want to try to be as true to this concept as possible, but I don't want individual brush strokes on this per se. So cleaning it up a bit, in a way, is how I look at that, without taking it too far from what the original artist intended to make. So I can kind of try to blend a lot of these colors and make it a bit more clean. You can see here the highlight from the stitching or sewing where this mask is connected is a little bit off, but I think that's more due to perspective than anything else. So we can repaint some highlights on here, on this mask, similar to what I did here with this edge, so that it's kind of catching the light. It's a little bit strong on this side compared to our concept, a little bit strong on the other side as well. You can kind of knock those back down, I think. And keep playing. Keep playing. That's how I like to, that's how I try to think about ZBrush, kind of like I'm playing a game. My favorite game, ZBrush. Makes it a little bit more fun. Instead of saying, oh, I'm going to work, it's like, oh, I'm gonna go play my ZBrush game. Let's see here for that little crease in here, that wrinkle. It's got a little bit of a highlight on the actual wrinkle, as I think it should. Whoops. Too many buttons going on here at once. So we can try to get that in there a little bit for that highlight. Some shadow around those cracks. Again, I want to show you guys a way that we can do some masking to get within those cracks, so that I can mask those off and create some highlights and also some shadows in those areas. I think that'll be pretty cool once we get to do that. It's a technique that I think is pretty standard when it comes to adding some detail to whatever you're painting, really. I think it has a lot of applications, but it's one of my favorite steps in the painting process, and I think you guys will like it too. So let's turn off perspective so that when I do project this, it'll do a little bit better. And let's find out where I need to move my mouth. So I can turn down the opacity here. Maybe not. There we go. Let's go ahead and do that just so I can see a little bit better. Okay, and I want just my mouth here, and turn off the color so I can see where this is occurring. And it looks like I said, I need to move my lips up a little bit, try to align them with that crease. I also have a poly group here. It's not a great poly group, but it's going to allow me to mask that off a little bit, so I can try to align these lips a little bit better than what I have currently. And I think we'll say that this is pretty good enough, and once I add that paint in there and project that, we'll be able to clean it up and correct it, as we have done already so many times. Let's adjust the mouth a little bit more on the corners. Whoops, rotated a little bit there on accident. Trying to pull that upper lip down a little bit more thin. step up the subdivs so we can kind of see what's happening here. And let's take a look here just at the clean geo so that I can make these adjustments a little bit easier. So trying to keep these forms just really clean through here, as clean as I can at least. And I can turn, if you see this is just a duplicated head piece with the geometry kind of smushed so it's not showing through there. We can delete a lot of that, but I didn't want to quite yet because I still wanted my subdivision levels, just so we could make little adjustments like I just did there. So if I turn my poly paint on here for the mouth, we can again see that that is out of alignment. And if I turn my RGB intensity on, I think we'll be able to correct some of this. And hey, that's looking pretty good. It's aligning pretty well, I think. Just kind of going around that area. And we can now make some adjustments to this paint here. And I think that worked out pretty well. Looks like we have some places that we definitely want to really clean up here. But in terms of projection paint, that went better than I could have expected. Try to carry this color up through the corners a little bit better. You can see here that we got some blending up through there that I want to clean up. Try to clean some of that. And again, being very light on the brush strokes here, simply because you can be pretty destructive pretty quickly with this stuff. If you're having some trouble, I recommend that you drop your RGB intensity down to about 50, so it's a lot lighter. If you're struggling to really get those light strokes in there, it can be very helpful. As we go here, I think this is starting to look pretty good. Pretty close to what we're looking for. Again, that mask blending through there. Just a little bit of cleanup, or a lot of it, depending on how you look at it. I want to go past what I can see here. Really trying to blend these colors as best as I can. And I'm going to blend back down through here just to kind of follow the line of the jaw. And we'll come up through here and do the same thing on the other side. And again, I might be able to do some symmetry here, but you can see that there is some asymmetry going there. So I don't really want to even mess with it at this point. Just because I don't want to make some paint over what I already got that I like. And we'll bring that all the way down here through to the chin, just to make sure that we don't have any white. Don't want any of that to be visible. And we'll be deleting geo that we don't see, of course, like I said before. That'll be pretty helpful for us. Alright, I think that's starting to look a lot better over here on the face, just trying to fix all that bleeding that we had from that projection. But hey, that's to be expected in all honesty as you create these projections. If you're using this similar technique to what I'm doing here, you're obviously going to have all sorts of cleanup that you're going to have to do. Definitely don't expect to, even the projection that I had on the lips, that might not have seemed that clean to you, but in my experience that turned out pretty well. So I wouldn't even expect stuff to turn out that nice. But the reason that turned out so nice is just because of the pre-work that I put in sculpturally to get this a lot closer to the concept that that I had here to work with. So that's definitely been very helpful, which is why I recommended, again, taking that time to really just be patient with blending all of this, because you are going to have a lot to kind of work with here. Trying to bring these muscles, some highlights down through here, just to make those stick out a little bit more, as well as catching the turn of the edge for the shadow. You can see here that the chin has a nice good highlight on it. We can kind of try to exaggerate some of these colors a little bit, and just kind of get a little bit of a cleaner form here. While of course, you know, still keeping this painterly quality to a lot of this. And I think the shadow's a little bit too dark for as thin as that's supposed to be. I'm going to try to bring in a little bit more of that flesh tone through here to highlight that that area a little bit better. And grab my image, toggled it away on accident. Cool. And obviously here on the mask we got some bleeding on this side. I'm gonna clean that up as well. Same on this side. Don't want any of that. No skin on the mask, please. Or at least no skin on the visible portions of our mask, please. All right, let me show you guys this this technique that I've been talking about for masking off. Well, that's pretty fun. We got a nice good slice going on there with our quick save over the little pointy ears. So using some masking techniques, we're able to mask cavities and some different stuff that we got going on here. So I'm going to take the mask, and by mask I mean Batman's mask, my subtool here, this subtool that I currently have active, come down into masking under tool, and then go into mask by cavity. There's a few different options in here. We're going to keep it on the default and see what we get to begin with. But before I do that, I want to disable my poly paint and make sure I have a white color on. So I'm going to come up here just so I can see exactly where my masking is taking place. So mask by cavity. And you can see here, it didn't come through on these cavities here. It looks like it got most of this. Intensity is all the way up. You might be able to get some different results messing with these, or messing with your blur options. And we can go ahead and try to do that. Let's go ahead and try to do that a little bit here. So just increasing my blur. It doesn't look like it did anything. Let's mess, excuse me, with our profile. Messy mask. Mask by cavity again. Little bit. I wonder what kind of results we'll get if we just pull that all the way up. A little bit better, but now that we kind of have a good base of the masking taking place, I can kind of manually go through and mask a lot of these areas off, and I think I will go ahead and do that. But you can see here that we have a pretty good base for starting what we got here. I'm going to turn on lazy mouse on my mask and go through masking off all these areas. And I'm not going to be super cautious and clean with this masking. I don't need it to be, except for in these areas. I would like it to be a little bit more clean. But in all honesty, it's not going to be super hard for me to go back over those areas and correct them just by doing my own hand painting, which we've been doing this whole time. So we've had plenty of practice today. And if you need to, you can always turn up your lazy radius, make that stroke. Wow, that is long. Way longer than I wanted. Do about 80. You can see here that we can have a little bit of a longer red line to guide us and help us. Alright, we'll do the same thing here. A little bit thick. I think that's okay though. A little bit lighter mask than what we have in the crevices. This will make for a good highlight for us, I think. Up here on the mask, pull that all the way down. Control clicked on accident, blurred my mask, did not want that. So I undid that real quick. And up through here, and again, the thickness of this, I'm not super worried about. But yeah, I think this will be worth it in the end once we get here. Once we get to about the stage that we're at right now. Clean that up. And from here, I'm gonna turn off that lazy mouse, unmask some of this junk that we're not even painting or messing with. These we are though. These won't be really visible down here just from the angle of our render, but we got them started to be masked, so we might as well finish them. So we got some cavity masks going on here with a lot of help from our masking palette down there in the tool section. And I can control click on my mesh, and that's going to soften a lot of these masks that I've created, and control click the other way just to kind of soften them that way as well. We can turn on our paint, and around these areas I am going to just grab my highlight color here from my nose, so just that color, and sample it and try to bring it through on a lot of these areas. And I don't have to be super strong with this. In all honesty, I probably don't want to be. I probably want it to be a little bit more subtle than what I was just doing there. So turning my RGB intensity down quite a bit can help in those areas. So just kind of pulling out this area, this cavity here that we have, and pulling that all the way up around these edges, and you'll see that we can get a nice little rim highlight going on here. And we'll need to do some cleanup around these areas as well, but just for some quick highlight in there to get a good base of what you're trying to accomplish, I think this works pretty well. And if you're having some trouble, again, I think lazy mouse could help you out a lot here. And I'll just kind of pull this through on these edges to kind of pull through here. And I already have these highlights kind of in place, so in a little bit we will probably inverse our mask and paint a few more shadows in these crevasses. Awesome. All right. And you can see here that we're getting a little bit more visibility on these details that we sculpted previously. So this is this works really well with organic creatures if you're working on wrinkles or anything like that, and you want to add some darkness to those areas. I have found this technique to be extremely helpful. I can kind of try to blend a good portion of this as well. While we're up here on the forehead, that is. And not really a huge fan of the highlight up here that we're getting on the top of the head, so I kind of want to blend it out a little bit on both sides. Just to kind of take it down a few notches. And bleed that back into the back of the mask here. And we'll have to, as you can see here on the sides of the head, we still have a fair amount of work to do there. But from the front, I think we're looking pretty good. But we do want to kind of continue here with our highlights. So I can grab that highlight color again and begin to try to pull that through these shapes. And I'm being a little bit sloppy and quick, which I don't recommend typically, but I don't think that I'll keep most of the highlights that I'm painting here. I will end up blending some darker colors in here to clean that up. And I'm going to have to Dynamesh this mask into my neck at some point, just so that I can blend these shapes a little bit better than just kind of butting up against one another. And that'll be a lot nicer when we go to paint and blend those together as well. Doing all of that will be very helpful. I definitely want to darken the sides of my head here. I think we've gotten a little bit bright. I think we had a little too much of that white color that ended up shearing from the rim light onto the side of our head. So I do want to get to quite a bit darker on the sides here. We can mess with that a little bit. But we still have our mask applied on here, so if I control click, it's going to invert my mask. I'll turn that poly paint off so you can see that everything is masked except for our crevices. So what I can do now is grab, like, let's see, this dark purple under here. It's pretty much black. It's not quite black. And you can do a fill object. You don't have to do this fill object. You can do it manually if you so desire. But clicking that a couple times will fill in those creases or those crevices, whatever you have on your mesh, skin folds, whatever. It'll fill in those areas with that black color. Just kind of darkening those and adding a bit more depth to those shapes. And I just cleared my mask there. You can kind of see what's happening there. I can pull my image up here and increase that opacity. And we can kind of take a look at our reference image and see that we do have some highlights going on here, but they're pretty small compared to what we have going on. So like I said, we will be blending a lot of that in back into our mesh, but we do want to have like a good base to be able to work off of, and that mask by cavity down here is a great way to get a good starting point on a lot of those shapes. So I think that actually ended up turning out pretty well for what we're looking for and being able to move forward. Looking at our highlights though, we can easily just gently blend a good portion of these back in, just so we have a little bit more of a thin highlight there. I think this is good because I haven't done many painting tutorials, and the fact that I get to kind of share a lot of these techniques with you guys, I hope is helpful for you. I'm going to, because we paused, I have about 15 more minutes that I'll stream for and show you guys as many more techniques with painting as I can. I feel like I've showed you guys a lot already, and I hope that it's been helpful for you guys. And again, for anybody that has popped in here late and checked this out, again, I'm going to throw this up on my YouTube, so if you feel like you missed anything, no worries, don't worry about it. I'll throw it up on my YouTube. Throw it up, there I go again. I'll put it up on my YouTube, and I'll have that up there and edited in the next 24 hours or so. I have a fairly quick turnaround with those, so I'll have it up there by tomorrow for sure, and possibly tonight if I can for you. So if you missed anything coming in late, don't fret. I'll put it all on the line for you guys, as they say on the internet. There's some weird specks going on around here. It is a little bit dark, so it's kind of hard to see, but I do want to clean a lot of that up. I'm going to grab a light highlight color. I'm going to pull that through here. I want this to start off very strong. I don't really want a lot of attention drawn to these areas. Essentially, you want the highlights to draw the eye, and you want the darker areas to kind of mask where you don't want the viewer to look. So obviously I want most of the attention on the face, so I'm going to put most of the highlights there, and this more serves for framing of my mesh and my work down here. So some highlights I think on the cape are good, just to kind of give it a little bit more depth, since we're working with some pretty dark colors down here. But I think that's something you want to definitely keep in mind if I have not mentioned it previously. So highlights, draw the eye, keep where do you want your viewers' attention, essentially. Think about that. And try to paint accordingly. And it's always tough when you're working with dark colors, I'll say, just because things can get out of hand and in shadow very quickly. So it's definitely not easy. Just try to be careful and not start filling in so much black that you can't see anything. And I'll be playing with my lighting setup again, so that I can kind of brighten things up a little bit. But I do want some of these dark shadowed areas to be almost entirely black and serve more of just for the purpose of the illustration. So I'm pretty much going to be cutting off the cape there, like I said at the beginning of the stream, if some of you heard that, and have that sort of just kind of frame the bust. So having that cape frame there, and I'll fix a lot of these dirty shapes that we have going on here. That's not a very clean cut, so I'll be doing a much cleaner cut down the road. But yeah, I think we've come a long way from where we started, and I think things are starting to really come together, look a lot better. Like I said, it just takes time. I think that's true for most things in art in general. I think you can do pretty much anything if you have enough time. But it seems like we've made a lot of progress here, and we've come a long way, being able to really bump up a lot of these shapes and clean a lot of this up. Most of my attention is going to be going onto the side of the head here. You can see here we got some weird, the masks that I drew got a little bit dark there, so I'll probably have to go through and clean up some of that. Again, I'll have to blend the mask into the neck, so that'll be a whole thing. And once I do that, that geometry that is not visible will be deleted, so we can get rid of all those unused Garbo polys that we don't need. And continue forward, working on this guy. But yeah, I think we've come a long way, like I said. So at this point, I'm thinking, if you guys don't have any questions or anything else before I head out, I think that's where we'll cut it. I think that's a good stopping point for this stream. I just want to say thank you to everybody that came in here. I appreciate you all coming in and being able to join me. Hopefully the next stream will be not too far off. We'll be able to talk again, have some more people in here, and I can show you some more cool stuff. And by then, I'm hoping that I'll be done with this Batman sculpt and be able to move on to the next thing, like I was talking about with the video that I was exporting before. I'm hoping that I'll be able to work on some personal IP character designs and figure out where to go from there and try to do something that I can maybe 3D print and move forward on. So with that, guys, again, thanks for coming. You guys are great. And if you missed anything, this will be up on YouTube within the next 24 hours. So no worries if you missed anything and you're just popping in here at the last minute. Hey, don't leave, wait, don't go. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.